Snow fell gently from the dark sky, covering the empty streets in a thick, cold blanket. The wind whispered through broken buildings, carrying with it the smell of smoke and frozen metal. In the shadow of an old market stall, a young alien girl sat with her knees pulled tightly to her chest. Her thin clothes were soaked from melted snow, clinging to her small frame. Her feet were bare, pressed against the icy ground until they were almost numb. She shivered with every breath, her long hair wet and tangled, sticking to her face. She had been sitting there for hours, maybe longer. Time had stopped meaning anything to her since the day she lost everything. Her parents were gone, her home destroyed, and every door she knocked on had been slammed in her face. She had learned quickly that no one wanted her, especially now, in the middle of winter, when everyone was fighting to survive. The world had become a place where kindness was a memory, and trust was dangerous. Her stomach growled again, loud in the silence. She pressed her arms tighter around herself as if that could make the hunger go away. 2 days, maybe 3, since her last real meal. The only thing she had eaten was a piece of stale bread she had found half buried in the snow. She had thought it would make her feel better, but it only made her feel weaker. Her small body couldn't take much more of this cold. Footsteps crunched on the snow somewhere nearby. She didn't lift her head. Strangers passed often, and none of them cared to stop. Some looked at her with disgust, others with fear. To them, she was nothing, just a dirty alien girl sitting where she didn't belong. She had heard their whispers before. Stay away from her. Trouble follows her. The footsteps grew closer, and this time they stopped right in front of her. She froze, her body tense, her breath catching in her throat. Slowly she lifted her gaze. A tall figure stood over her. Human man. The first thing she noticed were his eyes, calm yet sharp. They didn't have the cold emptiness of the others. Instead, they studied her with something that felt strange. Almost like concern. He was dressed for the weather, wearing a thick coat lined with fur, heavy boots, and gloves. Snow clung to his shoulders, melting slowly into tiny drops. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out something, a thick, dark jacket. Without a word, he held it out to her. She stared at it, then at him, her mind racing. Why was he offering it? What did he want in return? On her world, nothing was free. Kindness was just another way to set a trap. "I can't take it," she whispered, her voice hoarse from days without speaking. But the man didn't move his hand away. His voice was calm, deep, and steady when he finally spoke. "You'll freeze out here," he said simply. The words were not a question. They were a truth. When she didn't take the coat, he stepped forward. Carefully, without touching her skin, he placed it around her shoulders. The warmth hit her instantly, wrapping around her like a shield against the cold. Her shivering slowed, and for the first time in days, she felt the icy ache in her bones begin to fade. The smell of the fabric was strange, something clean, warm, and human. "You have somewhere to go?" he asked. She shook her head slowly, her eyes dropping to the ground. The truth was too heavy to speak. If she told him she had nowhere, maybe he would leave like everyone else. But instead, he crouched down so his eyes were level with hers. "I have a small home nearby," he said. "You can stay there until the storm passes." Her heart thumped faster. A home. A roof. Warmth. It sounded too good to be real. She had heard stories about humans, some kind, some cruel, but she had never met one who spoke like this. There had to be a reason, a price. Something hidden behind his words. Her mind screamed caution, but her body was too weak. The snow was falling harder now, and the wind cut through her thin clothes even with the coat around her. If she stayed here, she would not see another sunrise. She hesitated, her lips parting, but no words came out. Finally, with a tiny nod, she agreed. He stood and offered his hand. For a moment, she didn't take it, but then, slowly, She reached up and placed her small, cold fingers in his gloved palm. He pulled her gently to her feet. She stumbled from weakness, but he steadied her without a word as they began walking through the snow-covered streets. She glanced at him from the corner of her eye. The man didn't look back at her or ask questions. He just walked ahead, keeping his pace slow so she could keep up. The coat was heavy on her shoulders, but it was a weight she didn't want to let go of. Behind them, the abandoned market faded into the distance. Ahead, somewhere beyond the falling snow, was warmth for the first time in a long time. She felt a tiny spark in her chest, a small, fragile hope, but still, one question burned in her mind: why was this human helping her? The snow crunched under their feet as they walked through the silent streets. The human kept his pace slow so she wouldn't fall behind. The cold air stung her face, but the coat he had given her kept the biting wind away from her small body. Her breath came out in white clouds, and each step felt heavier than the last. But she didn't complain. She had learned a long time ago that complaining only made people angry. The streets were nearly empty, shops were closed, windows boarded up, and doors locked tight. Once in a while, someone peeked out from behind curtains to watch them pass. The girl lowered her head every time. She didn't want to see the eyes that judged her, or the whispers that followed whispers she had heard all her life, but the human didn't seem to notice, or maybe he didn't care. He just walked, his shoulders steady, his boots leaving deep prints in the snow. Finally, after what felt like forever, he stopped. They stood in front of a small building made of dark wood and stone. It wasn't large or fancy, but there was a faint orange glow from the windows. The smell of smoke from a fire drifted out, and the warmth seemed to seep into the air. He turned to her. "This is it," he said simply. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the coat. Stepping inside someone's home was dangerous. She had been tricked before, given food, then locked in, treated like she was owned. Her heart pounded as she tried to decide if this was another trap, but her body was so tired, her legs ached, her fingers were numb, and her stomach felt like it was curling in on itself. The human didn't rush her. He opened the door and stepped aside. Letting the warm air spill out, it wrapped around her like a blanket, and for a moment, I almost forgot to breathe. Inside, there was light, a real fire, and the smell of something cooking. Her frozen feet ached at the thought of warmth. Slowly, she stepped over the threshold. The inside of the house was small, but clean. A fire burned in the corner, throwing shadows across the wooden walls. There was a simple table, 2 chairs, and shelves with small items she didn't recognize. On one side, a couch sat close to the fire, covered with a blanket. It looked softer than anything she had slept on in years. "Sit," the man said, pointing to the couch. She obeyed without a word, sinking into the cushions. The heat from the fire reached her legs, and she felt her frozen toes start to tingle painfully. She kept her hands in her lap, unsure if she was allowed to touch anything. The man disappeared into another room, and she heard the sound of metal and glass clinking. When he returned, he was holding a steaming bowl. He set it down on the small table beside her. "Soup," he said. The smell hit her instantly: warm broth, soft vegetables, and the faint scent of meat. Her mouth watered and her stomach twisted painfully. She hesitated, afraid to seem greedy, but when he nodded toward the bowl, she picked up the spoon and took a small sip. The warmth slid down her throat. It was so simple, yet it felt like the best thing she had ever tasted. Her hands shook as she ate, faster and faster, until the bowl was nearly empty. When she finally looked up, the man was sitting in the chair across from her. He wasn't staring like others did. He was just watching, not with suspicion, but with quiet patience. "You can stay here until the storm ends," he said. His voice was calm, but there was something firm in it. She lowered her spoon, unsure how to answer. On one hand, she wanted to stay more. than anything on the other. She couldn't trust promises. Why? She finally whispered, "Why would you help me?" He leaned back in his chair, his eyes still steady on hers. "Because you need it," he said simply. "No one should be out there alone in this cold." She swallowed, her throat tight. No one had ever said something like that to her. Not? "Without wanting something in return, you don't have to tell me your story now," he added. "Just rest. Eat. The rest can wait." Her chest felt strange, almost heavy, but not in a bad way. It was like something she had kept locked inside for years was trying to break free. She nodded slowly, unable to speak. The man stood and went to check. The fire, adding another log, the crackle of the flames filled the silence between them. A silence that, for the first time, didn't feel dangerous when she finished the soup. He handed her a folded blanket. "You can sleep here tonight," he said, pointing to the couch. "I'll be in the next room if you need anything." She clutched the blanket, the soft fabric warm against her fingers. Her eyes stung, but she didn't let the tears fall. She just nodded again. Watching him disappear through the doorway, left alone, she pulled the blanket over herself. The fire's glow painted the walls in gold and red. Her body began to relax. Sinking deeper into the couch, her eyelids grew heavy, but her mind still whispered warnings. Don't trust him. Don't trust anyone. Yet there was another voice. Now, softer but stronger. A voice that said, maybe, just maybe, this human was different. Outside, the wind howled, and the snow fell harder. But inside, for the first time in years, she felt safe enough to close her eyes. And as sleep began to pull her away, one thought stayed with her. She was no longer alone in the snow. Someone had offered her warmth, shelter, and maybe even a place in his heart. The sound of the fire was the first thing she noticed when she woke. It wasn't loud, just a soft crackle, like the fire was breathing quietly. The heat wrapped around her, chasing away the icy fingers of the storm outside. She didn't remember falling asleep, but her body felt heavier, as if it had finally stopped fighting to stay awake. For a moment, she didn't move. Her eyes stayed half closed as she listened. There was no shouting, no footsteps coming to drag her away, no sharp voices demanding answers, just the calm hum of the wind outside and the fire inside. It felt unreal. She opened her eyes slowly. The blanket still covered her from chin to toes, and the coat he had given her lay neatly folded at the end of the couch. Her stomach gave a small growl, gentler this time. No longer the deep ache of days without food. She touched her chest and felt warmth there too. The kind that didn't come from the fire. The room was dim except for the glow of the flames. Shadows danced on the walls, and the smell of burning wood filled the air. She sat up slowly. Careful not to make noise, she had learned to move quietly. It was safer that way. A sound came from the other room. Soft, steady, rhythmic curiosity pulled her toward it. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and stepped barefoot onto the wooden floor. Her feet didn't freeze here like they had outside. The boards were warm from the heat of the fire. Peeking around the doorway, she saw him. The human was sitting at a table. His head bent over something small in his hands. A dim lamp lit the space, casting a circle of light across the wood he was carving. A small knife moving carefully along a block of pale wood. Each movement was slow and precise, as if he had done this many times before. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, watching the way his hands worked. After a moment, without looking up, he spoke, "You're awake." It wasn't a question, it was a gentle statement, like he had expected her to come. She froze, unsure if she was in trouble for leaving the couch. "Ah, yes," she said softly. He nodded toward the table. "Come sit." She hesitated before walking over, pulling the blanket tighter around her. When she sat across from him, she saw the shape he was carving, a small animal. Its ears were long, and its eyes, though unfinished, already seemed alive. "What is it?" she asked without thinking. "A leaper," he replied. "They live in the forests, quick on their feet. Up. I used to see them when I was younger." She touched the edge of the table, keeping her hands away from the carving. "Why are you making it?" His knife paused for a moment before moving again because sometimes it's nice to make something with your hands. Something that doesn't ask for anything in return. His words sat in the air between them. She didn't know what to say. She had never known people who gave without expecting something back. Her eyes dropped to the blanket in her lap. "People don't just help for no reason," she said quietly, almost to herself. The knife stopped again, and this time he looked up at her. Maybe not everyone, but some do. Her heart gave a strange twist. She wasn't sure if she believed him yet, but a part of her wanted to. After a moment, he set the carving aside and stood. "You should eat something before you sleep again," he said. He went to the small stove, lifting the lid off a pot, and the smell of soup and bread filled the air again. Her stomach tightened with hunger. But she waited until he brought the bowl to the table. Steam rose from it, and the warmth hit her face before she even took a bite. She ate slowly this time. She wanted to make it last. He didn't rush her or ask questions. Instead, he sipped his own drink and glanced at the window. "The storm's getting worse," he said. She followed his gaze. Outside, the snow was falling in thick sheets, the wind bending the trees and covering the world in white. "You won't be able to leave for a while," he added. Her chest tightened at the thought. Part of her feared being trapped anywhere, but another part, small, quiet, felt relief. Relief that she wouldn't be back in the streets tomorrow. Relief that, for now, there was a roof over her head. When she finished the soup, she set the bowl down and thanked him in a whisper. He only nodded and said, "Get some more rest. The couch is yours tonight." She stood, hesitating in the doorway for a moment. Her voice was almost too soft to hear when she asked, "Why do you trust me?" "You don't know me." His eyes met hers, steady and calm. "Because everyone deserves a chance," he said simply. Those words followed her back to the couch. She lay down, pulling the blanket tight around herself. The fire's warmth seeped into her bones, and the soft crackle lulled her toward sleep. Her mind still tried to warn her, "Don't believe. Don't relax," but her body was too tired to listen. The human's words echoed in her head until they blurred into dreams. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, for the first time in years, she slept without fear. And somewhere deep inside her, a thought began to grow. Thought that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she wasn't just surviving, but could belong. Morning light crept slowly through the frosted window, painting the room in a pale gold. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the air was cool, but not biting. The girl stirred under the blanket, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Her gaze swept over the small wooden room, the couch, the shelves, the quiet hum of the stove, and then the memory returned. The human's house, the soup, the warmth. She sat up slowly, still wrapped in the blanket. Her bare feet touched the floor, and she flinched slightly at the chill. The scent of bread baking drifted in from the next room. It was so strange to wake up to a smell like that instead of the stink of alleyways or the cold air of the streets. She walked quietly toward the doorway and peeked in. The human stood at a small counter, his back to her, slicing fresh bread. He moved with quiet confidence, like someone who was used to doing things alone. Beside him, a pot simmered, sending up wisps of steam. She lingered in the doorway, unsure if she should speak. "You can come in," he said without turning. She froze, realizing he must have heard her footsteps. Slowly, she stepped inside, her fingers gripping the blanket tighter. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder. "Yes," she replied softly. It wasn't a lie. She had slept deeply for the first time in years, but admitting it out loud made her feel exposed. He set the bread on the table and poured her a mug of warm tea. She sat down, the chair creaking under her small frame. The warmth of the mug seeped into her fingers. She sipped it slowly, unsure how to handle the strange calm of the moment. But the calm didn't last. Her mind began to wander, and the memories crept in like shadows, her home once noisy with laughter, now nothing but rubble after the raid. Her parents' faces fading in her mind, replaced by the harsh voices of the people who had taken her in only to push her away. They had called her cursed, a bringer of bad luck when food went missing. They blamed her when crops failed, they whispered her name. And when a valuable necklace disappeared from the merchant's house, they shouted for her blood. She had run that night through the alleys, across the frozen fields, chased by shouts and the glow of torches. Her breath had burned in her chest, her legs shaking, but she didn't dare stop. The snowstorm had caught her halfway to nowhere, blinding her, cutting into her skin like knives. That was when she had found the old market stand, when she thought her story would end there. The human's voice broke through the storm in her mind. "You look far away," he said, setting a plate of bread and cheese in front of her. She blinked, forcing herself back to the present. "I was remembering," she murmured. He didn't push for details. Instead, he sat down across from her, breaking a piece of bread in his hands. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to," he said. His tone was matter-of-fact, not gentle pity, and that made it easier to breathe. Still, she couldn't shake the thought, what would he do if he knew? Would he see her as a thief, like everyone else had? Would he turn her over to those who wanted her gone? The thought made her stomach twist. Even as she chewed the bread, part of her wanted to leave before he could change his mind, but another part, deep down, wanted to stay. The warmth of the fire, the quiet safety of the small house. It was something she had never truly had before. Her eyes flicked to him as he ate in silence. He seemed so steady, so sure of himself. There was nothing in his face that hinted at cruelty, but she had learned not to trust appearances. People could smile while hiding a knife. Do humans ever regret helping someone? She asked suddenly. He looked at her for a moment, then said, "Sometimes. But I don't think I will." His words were simple, but they landed heavy in her chest. She didn't know why, but hearing him say that made her want to believe him. Made her want to believe that maybe her story could be different here. The sound of knocking shattered the fragile moment, 3 sharp raps on the door. The human's expression shifted, calm, but alert. He stood and crossed the room, opening the door just a little. A man stood outside, wrapped in a thick coat, snow clinging to his hood. His eyes darted past the human. Scanning the room, "We are looking for someone," the man said. "A stray alien girl. Small, dark hair, thin build. Dangerous." The girl froze in her chair. Her heart beat loud in her ears. The human didn't glance back at her. "Haven't seen anyone like that," he said, his voice steady. The man frowned, but didn't push. He gave a short nod and left, his boots crunching away through the snow. The human closed the door and turned to her. She was still frozen in place, her hands gripping the blanket tight. "You lied," she said, her voice almost trembling. "I told them you weren't here," he replied simply. "Why?" She asked. "Because you're not dangerous," he said. "You're just cold and hungry." Her breath caught in her throat. No one had ever said something like that to her, not without sneering or mocking. She looked down at her tea, unable to meet his eyes. Something inside her shifted for the first time in years. She thought maybe she had found someone who wouldn't throw her away. The knock at the door had faded into silence, but the girl still felt the echo of it in her chest. It was like the sound had sunk into her bones. Even after the stranger's footsteps vanished into the snow, she couldn't shake the cold crawling through her. The human went back to the table, calm as if nothing had happened. He tore off a piece of bread, dipped it in his tea, and ate without looking at her. She sat frozen in her chair, clutching the blanket like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Her mind was spinning. He had lied for her. One sentence, so simple, yet so dangerous. If the wrong people found out, he could be punished. Maybe worse. Why did you do that? She asked again. Her voice was sharper this time, almost accusing. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Because you needed me to, he said. You weren't ready to be found. His words unsettled her. She wanted to believe they came from kindness, but part of her still whispered warnings. No one helped for nothing. And if this was a test, she wasn't sure what he was trying to see in her. The day passed slowly after that. The storm outside grew stronger, the wind screaming. Against the windows, she stayed close to the fire, wrapping the blanket tighter. The human worked around the house chopping vegetables, tending the fire, fixing a broken latch on the window, asking her to help, never pressing her with questions. It was strange, almost too quiet. By the time evening came, she had almost convinced herself that nothing would happen, that maybe the knock was just a small ripple in an otherwise still pond. But then the human went to the shelf and pulled out a small wooden box. He placed it on the table and looked at her. I want you to have this, he said. She approached cautiously. The box was simple, worn smooth from years of use. Inside was a folded piece of paper, small silver coin, and a strip of cloth embroidered. With delicate patterns, her eyes lingered on the cloth. It was beautiful. The kind of thing only someone's family would own. I don't understand. She said, it's a safe pass, he told her, if you ever need to leave this town. Give the coin and the cloth to the gate guards. They'll let you through without questions. She stared at him. Her mind was torn between gratitude and suspicion. Why give her a way out if he had just risked himself to hide her? Is this you telling me to go? She asked quietly. No, he said, shaking his head. I'm telling you that you have a choice. A choice. It was a word she had almost forgotten the meaning of. For so long her life had been about running, hiding, taking whatever scraps she could find. Choices were for people who mattered. People with safety. People with homes. She closed the box slowly and pushed it back toward him. I don't want to leave, she admitted. The words felt strange on her tongue, but they were true. For the first time in years, she didn't want to run. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Then stay, he said. But if the day comes when you can't, you'll have this. The conversation might have ended there, but fate wasn't done testing them. The sound of boots crunching through snow came again. This time, heavier, more deliberate. The girl's stomach dropped. The human moved to the door, opening it just enough to block the view inside. 3 figures stood outside, 2 men and a woman, all dressed in the dark coats of the town watch. The leader, a tall man with a scar down his cheek, spoke first. We've had reports, he said. A fugitive was seen in this area. Small alien girl. We're searching every house. The human's hand rested lightly on the doorframe. His body language calm but firm. I live alone, he said. The woman stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. Then, you won't mind if we look. The girl's heart pounded so hard she thought they might hear it. She backed away from the door, her bare feet silent on the floorboards. She needed to hide now. Her eyes darted around the room until she saw it. The wood storage bin by the fire, large enough for her to curl inside. She slipped into it quickly, pulling the lid down just enough to leave a small crack for air. From inside the dark space, she heard the voices. Boots thudded against the wooden floor as they stepped inside. The woman's voice was sharp, questioning. The man with the scar kept asking about the storm, about whether the human had seen strangers. Nearby, through it all, the human's voice stayed the same calm. Steady. He didn't raise it, didn't sound nervous. If she hadn't known better, She would have believed his lie herself. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the boots retreated. The door closed, and silence filled the room again. The lid of the wood bin creaked open, and she blinked against the sudden light. The human was standing there, one eyebrow raised. "You fit in there better than I expected," he said. She climbed out. Still shaking from the adrenaline, "They could have taken me," she whispered. "They didn't." He replied simply, "Because you stayed quiet, and because I told them what they needed to hear." It hit her that this wasn't just kindness. It was risk. Real, dangerous risk. He wasn't just offering her a coat or a meal. He was standing between her and the people who wanted her gone. And now, she thought, she had to decide if she could do the same for him one day. The storm had begun to quiet. Snow still fell outside, but the howling wind had softened into a steady whisper inside the small wooden home. The fire glowed brighter than ever, casting waves of golden light across the walls. The girl sat on the couch, wrapped in the blanket he had given her days ago. The wood bin she had hidden in earlier was now empty, but in her mind, she could still feel the tight, cold space around her. She could still hear the sound of the town watch's boots on the floorboards. They had been so close to close. The human sat across from her, sharpening a small kitchen knife with slow, even movements. The steady scrape of metal against stone was almost comforting. Neither of them had spoken much since the watch had left, but the silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt shared, like they were both holding on to something unspoken but understood. She finally broke the quiet. "You could have given me up," she said softly. Her voice was steady now, not trembling the way it had before. He didn't look up from the knife. "I could have," he agreed, "but I didn't." Her lips tightened, unsure if she should ask the next question. "Why?" He set the knife down, leaning back in his chair. His eyes met hers, calm and unwavering. "Because I've been there," he said. She blinked, not understanding. "You?" He nodded slowly. "Years ago, I was the one running. Different people were chasing me, but it felt the same. Cold, alone, wondering if the next knock on the door would be the end." She didn't know what to say. No one had ever told her they understood not like that. And somehow, knowing he had once been where she was now made his kindness feel heavier. It wasn't pity, it was memory. He stood and walked to a small shelf in the corner. From it, he took down a folded piece of fabric. Worn but clean. When he handed it to her, she saw it was a scarf, soft, deep gray, with a simple stitched pattern at the ends. "I made this," he said. "For you." She held it carefully, the threads rough under her fingers. "Why give this to me?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Because you need something of your own," he replied. "Something that means you belong somewhere." Her chest tightened. Belonging was not a word she used for herself. She had belonged to no one, belonged nowhere. Even when she had a roof, she was still treated as an outsider, a burden. But here, in this small house with this strange human, she felt a warmth she couldn't explain. She wrapped the scarf around her neck. It was warmer than she expected. "Thank you," she murmured. He gave a small nod and returned to his chair. They sat in silence again, but this time it was the kind of silence that made her feel safe. The days that followed blurred together in quiet routine. She began helping without being asked, tidying the table, sweeping the floor, stacking wood near the fire. At first, she did it because she felt she should repay him somehow. But soon, she realized she wanted to. The small chores made her feel like she was part of the home instead of just a guest passing through. One evening, while she was folding the blanket on the couch, he returned from the back room carrying a basket. Inside were root vegetables, a few small herbs, and a loaf of bread. "Dinner," he said. Setting it on the table, she smiled faintly. And for the first time, it didn't feel strange on her face. They cooked together that night. She chopped while he stirred, and the kitchen filled with the smell of warm broth and fresh bread when they ate. She realized something. It didn't feel like she was waiting for him to tell her to leave anymore. It felt like this was normal. Like the chair she sat in was her chair. Like the bowl she used belonged to her as much as it did to him. After dinner, they sat by the fire. He was carving again. This time shaping the wood into something small and delicate. She leaned forward to see. It was a figure, her. Wrapped in a blanket, sitting just like she had the night he found her. Her throat tightened. "You remember me like that?" She asked quietly. "I remember the night you almost froze," he said, not looking up from his work, "and the night I decided I wouldn't let that happen." She looked away, staring at the flames. A part of her wanted to tell him everything about the lies told against her, about the people who wanted her gone, but the words stuck in her throat. She wasn't ready yet, but she knew she was closer than ever. Later that night, as the fire burned low, she rose from the couch, the scarf still around her neck, the blanket folded neatly at her side. "Good night," she said. The human looked up from his carving and gave a small smile. "Good night," he replied. She lay down, listening to the quiet creaks of the house settling. The wind outside had almost stopped. And for the first time in years, she didn't fall asleep thinking about where she would hide tomorrow. Instead, she thought about the scarf, the fire, and the human who had risked himself for her. And somewhere deep inside, a truth settled into her heart. She wasn't just surviving here, she was beginning to belong. The storm passed in the night. By morning, the snow outside lay still and heavy, blanketing the town in white silence. The sky was pale, touched with the first weak rays of sunlight. The girl stood at the window, her breath making small clouds against the glass as she looked out. The streets were empty again, the noise of boots and shouts replaced by a calm that felt almost unreal. She had been in the human's home for days, now longer than she had stayed anywhere since she began running. Every morning she woke to the smell of bread or tea. Every night she fell asleep to the soft glow of the fire. The fear hadn't completely left her. It still lingered in her chest like a shadow. But here, in this place, it no longer controlled her every move. The human stepped into the room, his boots damp from the snow. He carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth from the market, he said, placing it on the table. She turned from the window, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Inside the bundle were small pieces of fruit bright against the gray morning light. She picked one up, turning it in her hands. "It's been so long since I had one of these," she murmured. Almost to herself, he shrugged lightly. "Figured you should have something sweet," he said. She looked at him, searching his face for any hidden reason, but there was none. He simply meant it. It still felt strange having someone do something for her without expecting anything back. They ate in quiet comfort. When they were done, he pulled on his coat and said he needed to check the woodpile outside. She stayed by the fire, wrapping her hands around a warm mug, but as she sipped, she realized she didn't want to spend the morning apart. For so long, she had been used to being alone. Now, even a short absence felt wrong when he came back. In shaking snow from his shoulders, she was already pulling on her own coat. "I want to help," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "With the wood?" "With anything," she replied firmly. He didn't argue, just nodded. They worked side by side in the small yard, stacking wood into neat piles. The cold bit at her fingers, but the movement kept her warm. At one point, she stumbled on a patch of ice, and his hand shot out, steadying her before she could fall. For a moment, their eyes met. It was brief, but in that glance, she felt something solid, something unshakable pass between them. As they finished, voices drifted from down the street. Two townspeople were talking as they walked by. She caught fragments, rumors about the watch, still searching, about strangers being questioned. Her chest tightened, but before the fear could take root, the human's voice cut in. "They won't find you here," he said quietly. Without looking at her, "You believe that?" she asked. "I know that," he replied, his tone certain enough to make her believe it too. Back inside, the fire roared again, and the smell of stew filled the air. They sat at the table as the light outside faded to gold. She found herself watching him as he ate, how he didn't rush, how he never seemed to fill the air with needless words. It struck her that his silence wasn't cold, it was steady, like a foundation she could stand on. After dinner, he took out the carving he had been working on for days. It was finished, now a small wooden figure of her, wrapped in a blanket, sitting the way she had that first night. He set it on the table in front of her. "It's you," he said. Her throat tightened. "Why would you make this?" "So you remember where you were." "And how far you've come," he answered. She touched the figure gently, her fingers tracing the carved folds of the blanket. It wasn't just wood, which proof that someone had seen her and decided she was worth remembering, worth keeping. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. As the night deepened, the wind picked up again. But it wasn't the howl of a dangerous storm, just the normal breath of winter. She sat on the couch, the scarf still around her neck, watching the fire dance. The human sat in his chair, reading quietly. The room felt small, but in the best way. Like the walls weren't closing in, they were keeping the cold world out. She thought about leaving someday. It was possible, maybe even likely, that she would have to. But the thought didn't fill her with dread anymore, because now she knew something she hadn't before. Even if she left, there would be one place, one person, where she was always welcome. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but certain. "I don't want to be alone again." He looked up from his book, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he set the book down and leaned forward. "Then you won't be," he said simply. It wasn't a promise shouted into the air, was spoken like fact. Like something as real as the fire between them, the girl leaned back into the couch, her body relaxing in a way it never had before. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, she knew she wasn't just a runaway. She wasn't just a survivor. She was someone who mattered. Someone who had a place not just in a home, but in a heart. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the fire burned warm and steady. And for the first time since she could remember, she wasn't afraid of the night. She knew, deep down, she was never going to be truly alone again.